Thanks for having me today. Thanks to Natalie and Ian for inviting me. So I might not look very Asian, but I might be more Asian than many of you. So I'll try to tell you a bit more about what I've been up to in Asia. And I'm here actually also to ask you this question. Can the next Steve Jobs be Brazilian? So let's get started. So I'll tell you a bit more about, okay. So this was my view of the world when I was in school. It was pretty simple. Since then, fortunately, my views have changed quite a bit. And I lived in quite a few countries. So I'm from France originally. I lived in Japan, Korea, China, Germany, the US, Singapore, and I'm moving soon to Malaysia. And the more I was traveling and living in different places, the more I realized I knew so little. And I've been here in Brazil. I arrived yesterday night. It's my first time in Brazil. And I've been blown away. I didn't know anything about Brazil aside from like 2 movies and probably like the image of bikinis on playa, right? But I realized that there's also a nascent and vibrant entrepreneurial scene, and that it's starting to happen. It's happening. And I've seen that in China also when I moved there in 2005. So I want to tell you more about. So in the past 10 years, I actually spent 4 years in Japan, a year in South Korea, 5 years in China, mostly working in the digital space. So with internet and mobile entrepreneurs. I've been running a consulting company researching innovation from Asia. So finding out innovative business models, innovative service concepts, and explaining how they work and why they work to companies around the world. I've also done a lot of talks, actually talking about innovation on Asia in 17 countries. So this is 18, so I'm very happy I'll be adding a flag. I'm also an advisor to many startup incubators, 2 of them in Silicon Valley, 1 in China, 1 in Poland, and 1 in Singapore. So I'm a little bit international, and so I thought, until I realized I wasn't that international. So I'll tell you more. I'm also an investor in 2 startups, one based in Beijing doing online games, another one based in Tokyo doing online translation platform, both of them doing pretty well. And since this year, I'm actually starting my own startup after doing a lot of advising. And I'll be developing it in Singapore and Malaysia for Western markets. So being international is sometimes a little bit draining. So this is my itinerary since 48 hours ago. So that means that I'd say my closest partner today is this guy. And but what I want to talk to you about initially, even though I've been working in the high-tech sector, you could say, is something very low-tech. It's this like low-key old technology, the movable type that's uses for printing with the printing press. So when I was at school, you can start to doubt what we actually learned at school in France, but basically at school I learned that this was invented by Gutenberg, 1450. So who learned that too? So I learned that, okay, a few of you, okay. Later I moved to Korea and I discovered that they actually had a metal movable type, 1230. And then in China, this inventor called Bishang created it in 1040. So that's 400 years before Gutenberg. So I had no idea about that before I moved to China. And I think this is really interesting because, well, first, I was wrong based on what I've been taught. But more than that, actually proves a few things. Number one is that ideas don't have a nationality. So sometimes you hear, like Asia is all about copy, US is all innovation. Ideas don't have a nationality. It's about people. Second thing is that things can be invented more than once. So there's no evidence that Gutenberg knew anything about the Asian movable types. So things can be invented more than once. Third, you saw a 400 years time gap, right? So this time gap could be bridged. Of course, today, with the speed of the internet, ideas travel a bit faster. But still, you can find ideas that take 10 years, sometimes 20 years or more to travel. And just imagine how the world would look like if we had heard in Europe about Asian movable types 400 years earlier, the world would be very different. So there's this time gap, which is very good opportunity for entrepreneurs. Number 4, that I use here, Chinese proverb, foreign stones can polish your jade. So what that means is that an idea from somewhere can be actually more powerful somewhere else. If you take the idea of movable type, what it is that each character has an element that you place to print text. So with Chinese characters, you have thousands of them. It's not very efficient. You need like a massive rack of characters. Take the same concept, take it to Europe, where we have a small set of characters. Suddenly, it's much more usable, much more powerful. And in the same way, some ideas can be born somewhere and thrive and become very powerful in other places. So a quick word about civilizations. So I told you I didn't know much about geography in high school, and I learned a bit better later. And I thought I was kind of international guy because I live in a bunch of countries, I learned languages. And then I started to realize that, especially when I moved to Singapore, there was Indian people, Chinese people, and Malay people. Malay people are Muslim. And I realized that I didn't know anything about India. I didn't know anything about Muslim countries. So I started to look at things differently. And I realized that what I actually knew was basically so-called Western civilization, which is more like a kind of diagonal civilization from North America through Europe, through Australia. That's the Western civilization. Then there was actually a lot more than that. There was the Orthodox civilization with Russia, the Chinese, the Japanese, Muslim, African, Indian, and of course, Latin American. So this is just my second time in Latin America, first time in Brazil. And I'm really discovering everything. And there's some similarities with other ones. But even though in terms of culture, there's more proximity with Western civilizations, when I look at market development, I actually see more proximity with China. And I was discussing earlier with some entrepreneurs here, and seeing that based on ecosystem, on infrastructure and GDP per capita, there was actually more similarities with China than with North America or Europe. And I think there's an opportunity here for entrepreneurs in Latin America and Brazil for arbitration of ideas and successes from strong emerging markets. So the way I see it is that there's an emergence of digital civilizations. And if you look today at the leading internet companies in the world, I picked the top 22 so that I have a nice range. You see there's still a large number of American companies, North American companies, but there's some really strong Chinese companies, Japanese companies, Korean, and Russian. So of course they don't dominate in the world, but they're big enough to be ranked as a leading global company, even though they mostly dominate in their home market. So the question is not really if, but just when there will be Latin American internet companies that will be strong and dominate the market as well. Another idea I wanted to share is the idea that there's no innovation happening outside Silicon Valley. That's often what you hear, and I'd say Silicon Valley is very strong at promoting this message. And the reason I found that this is strong is because anytime they see something similar in a foreign market, they would tend to call it a copycat, totally not looking at the differences, which are actually what matters. And if it's not similar enough, then it's dismissed because it's not relevant for them, until possibly the company enters America's shores, and then if it succeeds there, then well, they rebrand the headquarters as US based, and then it becomes American. So with that framework, everything is American. So eventually nationality is really just a brand. And it doesn't really matter where it's from as long as it works, right? But some nationalities have, let's say, a positive image, some don't today. And what's interesting is to look at the fact that for some companies, there's actually no direct equivalent. What really matters are those small differences, and sometimes that can be really big. They can be in business models, marketing strategy, branding, payment systems. Could be so many differences. So it gives a chance for local champions to actually dominate the market, like this guy. And the advantage is really for locals because of the cultural fit they have, the market knowledge they have, and they're much more able to navigate the market forces. And the market forces at play are what I call the 5 C's of innovation. So you start with a copy. Some people are really against that, but I think personally that this is kind of the natural way. The natural drift of ideas around the world is that somebody picks it up and then start to do it where they are. So start with a copy, and then competition forces you to innovate. Because if somebody else is doing the same thing based on the same idea, you have to find new ideas to differentiate. You have to find new things. Then constraints, also great source of innovation, because based on, could be GDP per capita, could be the payment systems. You have a lot of things you need to change locally. Also a source of innovation. Combination, also a source. Combine 2 ideas in a new way, you get something new. And last is the context. So it could be the demographics of the country. It could be the geography of the country. If you have very highly concentrated urban areas, there's some things you can do that a very spread out country cannot. I have a few ideas I want to share from the game industry, which is, I think, one of the most active and interesting industries today. So I'll go quickly through this example. Tencent is the largest internet company in China. And they're a great example of how they navigated those 5 C's. So they started as a copycat, you could say, of ICQ, the famous Israeli company, and instant messaging. And then they couldn't make money with the same business model, with advertising. So they had to change. They combined with ideas they got from Korea with micropayments on digital goods, and they combined that inside the instant messaging. Of course, they were competing with other companies that also pushed them to innovate further and integrate better payment systems. And eventually, today, this is a massive company that is making this year probably about $4 billion in revenue with 40% profit. So it's a massive company. And that also shows that if you innovate based on somewhere else concept and then you iterate enough, you can actually leapfrog to a new model. If you hear about what's hot in Silicon Valley today, in gaming or in social networking, everybody's talking about microtransactions. This has been around in Korea and China for 10 years. And for a long time, it was branded as Asian. So it's a big advantage. And that also shows that becoming modern is not necessarily becoming Western. So this is kind of a view of Shanghai. And, you see tallest buildings here. One is yet to be built. But it shows that there's different paths to modernization. So another key idea I wanted to share with you today is about the opportunity for micro multinationals. So you can be a champion in your market, but you can also decide to create a company and be a global company. So you're probably familiar with those. All born in Northern Europe, in countries that were so small that they didn't even think that there would be a local player at any moment. They went global from day one. This company I'm actually involved in is a company that makes online games. So it's a first-person shooter, 3D, real-time, inside Facebook. So it's very advanced technology, very advanced game that's pretty successful and made entirely from China, where Facebook is blocked. So it's possible, even when you have like strong constraints, to create really amazing things. This other company, I think, is a good example, called BoomZap. This company doesn't have offices. There are 50 people. The people are in Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, Russia. They don't have offices. They're entirely virtual. So they have a company registered in one location, but people are just around the world. So there would be a million more things to talk about, but obviously don't have time for that. And, but this million more things actually beyond internet and beyond services is that you can actually make stuff. You can make products. It's cheaper today and easier to make anything than it has ever been. So I'll just share one quick example about how you can create original products. So I actually brought with me, so this phone, made in China. It's kind of average phone, and it has this interesting function here. So there's just a few thousand of those. It's really a niche product. It's average phone, a bad shaver, but it's the only shaver phone, right? So you can make those, and that's less than $100. product innovation is the cheapest that it's ever been. You can design, finance, produce, distribute much cheaper than before. You can even finance and gather users even before you create your products with platforms like Kickstarter, for instance. So it's really a big opportunity. I have a quick story to share here about an entrepreneur I was meeting in Singapore who just moved with his family. And he was telling his friends back home that he was about to move to Singapore. And his friends told him, "You're going to move to Asia? Are you crazy? How about the kids? What are you going to do?" Well, he said, "Well, I don't want my kids to grow up in an environment where everybody's depressed. I want them to grow up in a kind of thriving, optimistic environment. So I'm actually moving to Asia because of the kids. I'm moving for the kids." And I think you could replace Asia with Brazil, because you're also in a thriving market, growing market, optimistic market. And this is a tremendous advantage compared to so-called developed economy, which has a sense of it's kind of stalled, right? It's developed, it's done. So developing is really where people should be today. There might be some ideas that advanced markets have advantages, especially on education. I believe that education, of course, is important, but if you look at what's happening in most universities, it's more about jello shots than actual learning. But what I think really makes a difference is the cheering. And I think in the US, they're very strong at that, cheering from really early on, encouraging each other, pushing each other. Whereas I'm from France, and we're very good at criticizing things, not so much at cheering. And in Germany, it's even worse. They have a Schadenfreude, which is making fun of other people's misfortunes. So that's even worse. So as a conclusion, those are kind of recent articles about China and Steve Jobs. So China searches for the next Steve Jobs. Why the next Steve Jobs will be Asian? I think if you look at it, Steve Jobs is a guy who created artistic products bringing technology to people, to about 200 million customers today. Well, 200 million is about the population of Brazil. So bring something to Brazil that changes the lives of people, and you'll be the Steve Jobs of Brazil, right? And you can do that in Brazil, you can do that in Latin America, you can do that worldwide as well. So I'd say as a final words, I think Brazil is very famous for its football and the cheering for your soccer team. So what I want you to do now, and I think you're a great crowd for that, is to cheer your entrepreneurs and be proud of designing things. You can maybe not rebrand the entire country, but you can rebrand the city, starting with Sao Paulo, design in Sao Paulo, and cheer for your entrepreneurs. So thank you very much.